Okay, it is 3:30, so we will go ahead and get started.
Okay. I want to welcome everybody, both here at UNO and across the state, to the March program of the Sustainability Leadership Program Series. My name is Chris Reed. I'm the Interim Director of the Center for Urban Sustainability, and we're the sponsor for this month's program. When we were talking about what topic we might want to share with you this month, it occurred to us that this is about sustainability leadership, but how do we sustain the leaders? And so there's no better person to talk about that than Daniel Lawse. Daniel is the Chief Century Thinker and co-owner of the Virtus Group in Omaha, Nebraska. They are a sustainability consulting firm. And Virtus is a great friend to UNO. They helped us to, in fact, they wrote our sustainability master plan. And Daniel is also working with us on a Bioinnovation Summit that will take place in April. And he may be able to speak a little bit about that. I'm sure he'll speak about bioinnovation or biomimicry, which is the basis for today's talk, and also the basis for the Sustainability Summit here in April. But I don't want to take up any more of Daniel's time, and I'm going to turn over the floor to Daniel, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon. Welcome everybody across the state and here at UNO. I haven't done a lot of these where I have two audiences, one virtual and one present, so I'm going to look at the camera sometimes and I'm going to look at you sometimes. And there will be a point for those tuning in virtually where I'll move the camera and I'll do some work on an easel and we'll try to go full screen with that. So I'm here to talk to you about resilient leadership and what does that mean? A little bit about my personal journey and how I've come to engage leadership from the place that I am and my experience working heavily and hard in the environmental movement here in Omaha and across the state. And then talk about how biomimicry has informed some of the strategies I use and I found helpful in my life and hopefully you can find helpful in yours. So before we get started, I want to ask you to do something for me. You can either close your eyes or leave them open, but I want you to take 3 or 4 deep breaths and just pay attention to what you notice. And so as you're sitting in stillness, there's also motion. Or if you weren't breathing, you wouldn't be alive. And this is a key example of a dynamic equilibrium. Our breath rises and falls all day long, inhale and exhale. And without that rhythm of inhale and exhale, we aren't alive. So I'm going to come back to that throughout the presentation, but just be aware that even when you seemed relatively still, there was still movement going on. And even if you let go of paying attention to your breath, your heart was beating, your cells were active. So even in the presence of stillness, there's activity and there's a dynamic equilibrium present in the world. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about my journey. So there I am in college, wanting to change the world, eager to make the biggest difference I could. I was taught to go out and fix things, help make the world a better place. And I realized quickly that I had limits and I couldn't go save the whole world. I probably had a savior complex for a period of time, but I got over that. And I realized that I could be a little sneaky and try to still save the whole world by focusing on environmental issues. Because to me, many of the world's problems, whether they're poverty, illness, famine, war, all come back to some level of environmental issue. And so I started to focus on environmental issues as this leverage point. I took a journey through a variety of jobs, everything from landscaping, so I could literally work with my hands, to being the planning director of a small community in Iowa, trying to help create the most sustainable subdivisions that they could develop as a city and integrate sustainable practices into the city government. And then I actually ended up as part of the neighborhood center, which was housed under UNO's College of Public Affairs and Community Service for a while, doing this program helping people make energy efficient improvements in their homes and doing research around what changes might people make. And I was helping volunteering in the community, getting the Green Omaha Coalition started, starting the Green Neighborhood Council. And none of these things I did single-handedly. There were always other people helping me, but I was devoting a lot of my life, energy, and time to this space. And I loved it. I would get up and I'd get on my computer and email people and connect people and organize events and attend events and speak at events. And in this process, it was easy for me to get overwhelmed with all of the challenges facing us, whether it was climate change or species extinction or the water quality issues, the starvation, the social issues, the wars going on. And I would go back and forth between paying really close attention to the news, paying close attention to both local and global news, that whole phrase, think local, think global, act local. I really was tuned into that, and there were times when I got overwhelmed, and eventually I kind of hit this burnout phase. I was spending so much of my time and energy devoted to trying to fix the world that I started to neglect my family. I started to neglect my own health. I wasn't in balance, even though I thought I was making a good difference. And I also had kids during this period, which changed the dynamic from not having kids to having kids and how I spend my time. And I realized that I wasn't being as present of a father as I wanted to be. And that was having an impact on my child. That was having an impact on my wife. That was having an impact on me as a father. And so I went through this challenging period where I didn't really know what was most important anymore, because I really saw all of the brokenness of the world, the pain and the suffering that humans have. I'm deeply connected to the pain and suffering of all species, the plants and the animals that get ripped up or killed unnecessarily without any sort of respect. And it took me a while to get this frame in place, but a friend of mine shared this next slide with me in the last year or two. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I started to do. I started by thinking that I could change the world. And indeed, I made impacts. I helped start things in Omaha that still go on today. I helped change people's minds about things, but I was focused very much on changing the world. And it's overwhelming when that's my primary focus. And then I start saying, well, maybe I can affect things nationally. And that also, there's very little I felt I could personally do. So then I really started getting more involved even more locally in my community. And even that had its limits. And then it was really easy to try to change my family. You should do that, you should do this. And I was trying to change everything else and everyone else except for myself. And part of this was this tension between, this dynamic equilibrium between paying attention to myself and working to be the change that I want to see in the world and embodying these changes, but also reflecting on and understanding what's healthy in my life. And how do I make the most important things be the most important things, because I can't be effective in changing the world if I burn myself out, because then I'm not doing anything except recovering. I had a little bit of systems collapse. And so there's this saying by, it's attributed to an unknown monk that says, if you want to change the world, change yourself first. And that will change your family, and that will change your local community, and that will change the world. And so when I started to reframe my life around this image where personal health, taking care of myself, not obsessively, not selfishly, but in a good way, impacted my family, it impacted my friends, it impacted my work, and then my community. And for a long time, work and community were the center of my circle. And I thought I was doing good work, and some would, from the outside would probably say I did some good things, but I realized that it wasn't sustainable. So I was in the sustainability field, not being a sustainable leader. And one of the things that biomimicry teaches us, biomimicry is the practice of seeing the time-tested strategies in the world, in nature, in the living ecosystems. One of the things that biomimicry teaches us is that the world has limits. All living beings have limits. All systems have limits. And if you push against those limits, you can do that for a little while, but then you have systems collapse if you do it too much. One of the things we're looking at was species extinction and climate change and nitrogen in the soil for the dead zones of the in the Gulf of Mexico at the mouth of the Mississippi. So systems have limits, and I learned this one personally. And so part of this is knowing and accepting limits. And in order to know and accept limits, it's important that we quiet our own cleverness, that we have to be still enough and see with enough clarity and wisdom to know and be honest with ourselves, with myself, where my limits are. And so I took this journey of going inward and going deeper so that I could work on integrating my whole life and not just this, oh, I work a lot and my job happens to be in sustainability and I volunteer a lot and I'm making my community a better place. But integration is, many people would agree that integration is the definition of wholeness. And if you look around the world at all of the places that is disconnected, you see illness. Whether that illness shows up in death, in conflicted relationships, in war, in neighbors not getting along, in cities thinking one project is good for them but not for everybody else, and thinking resources are being shared unfairly. And then integration plays a role in my personal life too, in each one of us. When I'm not integrated throughout all of these spheres, I'm disconnected, and that causes dis-ease or unhealth. So integration, one of the fundamental shifts that happened in my journey was that integration equals health. So how can I better and more fully integrate in myself, and then I can start to see how to integrate things in the world. And sustainability by definition is about integration. It's about people, planet, and profits, or economy, environment, and society. And that Venn diagram where they overlap, that's the integration point. And that integration point in the Venn diagram can be really small, but over time it can be really big and basically be the whole circle of all three. So in this process of journeying from trying to change the world to changing myself, I took a few steps to discover more how to view the world with wisdom and with clarity, which, by the way, I'm not an expert at all, but I'm better than I was. I've made progress. And so I went on a vision quest in the desert of New Mexico, 4 days and 4 nights of fasting, by myself, in an effort to start to see myself more clearly and see the world more clearly. And that was one big step I took to start to reflect on who I was and where I was going in this kind of period of burnout. I also discovered a men's leadership group called the Mankind Project, which one of the biggest takeaways for me that I've learned through that project is emotional intelligence. Understanding how my emotions play a role in my life and how they're information to inform how I choose to respond, and that I am not my emotions. So here's a fun little trick, if you'll humor me. Everyone, even if you're at home at your computer, hold out your thumb in front of you. I'm going to ask you a question. Are you your thumb? No, I see heads shaking no. But do you have a thumb? Yeah, I do. It's really useful too, right? The opposable thumb's done a few amazing things. So do you have thoughts? Are you your thoughts? Are you? So the answer that works best is no, you're not your thoughts. I am not my thoughts. When I stop thinking, I still exist. Actually, Descartes had a little backwards. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, is a really interesting philosophy for another conversation, but that has messed up a lot of the way that we view the world. Our thoughts are really important, just like our thumb is, but it is not who we are. Same thing with our emotions. I have emotions, but I am not my emotions. And so as I start to get into right relationship with my thoughts and with my emotions and with the world around me, I'm better able to integrate and see the connection and integrate in a healthy way more on this journey towards wholeness. And this idea that a healthy planet exists when I'm healthy, and I can have a better and more full impact on the planet when I'm healthy to create this healthy planet. Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite. Yes, I'm going to go save the planet, I'm going to make the planet healthy, and yet I'm not practicing health in my own life. So through that, it actually led me to biomimicry, where I kept asking this question, what is beyond sustainability? Sustainability sounds really good, but it doesn't sound good enough yet. How many of you would like a sustainable relationship with your loved ones? I would. How about a thriving dynamic relationship? I would prefer that. And so there's this idea that sustainability was the term that came out of the United Nations back in the 80s, and it's been a really helpful term to get people to shift how they're thinking, because a lot of what we had been doing has been degenerative and disintegrating in our business, in our communities, in our nations, in our neighborhoods. And sustainability offered this vision of, well, let's integrate more. Let's get that Venn diagram of people, planet, and profits or prosperity coming together. But it assumes a static environment. It assumes a static vision that when we have a sustainable relationship with my wife, when I have a sustainable relationship with my wife, does that mean that we just like, everything's smooth, we never have bumps, we never have highs, we never have lows? That's no fun. And so this dynamic equilibrium that we touched on when you sat still but still had movement, that's present throughout all of the world. That's the way that nature operates, is in a dynamic equilibrium. So why would we settle for this idea that sustainability, kind of the status quo, this homeostasis, is where we should be striving for? And I commend all the sustainability work. It's really important. And I say biomimicry takes us to this next vision, this vision of a thriving, adaptive, resilient world. And I'll come back to some of how that's been informed, but the other piece that really has helped in my own sustainability, and one of the life principles that biomimicry talks about is called maintaining integrity through self-renewal. One of the best ways that plants and animals adapt to changing conditions, that change is the constant thing in life, is through maintaining integrity through self-renewal. Think of other mammals on the planet. How many of them follow their circadian rhythm? Probably just about all of them. How many humans do you know don't follow their circadian rhythm? Probably just about all of them. Maybe not. A large number. I know that I don't fully. So in this integration of personal health and world health, environmental health, I've had to start to pay closer attention to my own rhythms, my own needs, my own abilities, and my own limits. And biomimicry has helped unlock this way of looking at nature, the longest running R&D lab on the planet, to show me some of these strategies. And so another principle with biomimicry is leverage cyclic processes. Nature is cyclical, and things will just take the 24-hour day, right? Sunrise and sunset and the circadian rhythm. How do I leverage that? How do I rest when I need rest and be active when I need activity? Going back to my original story of kind of how I got here, I was like all activity all the time. I did sleep, but from waking up to going back to sleep, I was like the activity of activist with very little rest. And I felt like I was being very productive. And in fact, maybe I did some good things, but I wasn't resting in a way that was restorative. So I could not maintain my integrity long term. I couldn't be sustainable. I couldn't be I was not a resilient system. So it took me a long time to come back to a level of energy, a dynamic state that I was in where I could be even more effective. And this last tool that I've come across is the practice of meditation and the practice of mindfulness. And it's through this that it helps me see the world more clearly. It helps me understand my thoughts, and that they aren't me, but they're really helpful. It helps me see the world in a clearer way so that I can choose more effectively how to spend my time and energy. And it allows me to observe my surroundings more effectively and learn from nature and learn from others. And when I observe myself, I touch deep parts of who I am that I believe every person has. And when you still your thoughts and you're silent, the spontaneous thing that arises out of that is compassion. And maybe you've experienced that before. And if you haven't, I encourage you to practice silence and stillness and tap into that deep well of compassion that stems and rises from my core. And other people I've talked to who have a practice of silence and stillness say the same thing, and the books and the ancient teachings say the same thing. And so even though it feels a little bit selfish to stop being active, at least this is the story I tell myself, and sit still and practice a meditation for a while, it actually makes me a much more effective and compassionate person, which helps me practice integration in the world. There's a saying that all pollution starts with pollution of the heart. So what if all of the sustainability leaders stopped doing something and just stood there? What if the focus shifted from activity and to-do lists to helping clear up the pollution in their own heart and creating space for other people to clear the pollution in their heart, giving them the tools, setting the environment, sharing wisdom that helps people clear their own pollution in their own heart. And then the decisions that come out of elected officials, the decisions that come out of other leaders, the decisions that have created the world that's not working so well right now with some of the environmental issues, start to change themselves. And it's kind of like Aikido. Aikido is a martial art where you use the energy that's already in the system to get it back in balance, or to throw it off balance. If your enemy is attacking you and your Aikido master, you let them use their energy to throw themselves off, and I stay in balance. So how do we use the energy present in the system? One of the ways we do that is by helping people practice clearing the pollution in their own heart. And I posit that a little bit strongly, knowing that it's not an either or, right? We started talking about a dynamic equilibrium. We need activity, we need rest. We need the interior work and we need the exterior work. We need sustainability of the mind and we need sustainability of the heart. And when we have these practices integrated, we start to create wholeness in our own life, in our families, with our friends and community, with our work, and in the broader community. And we start to practice integration in how we have business practices. People start to see the connections between the decision I make with a supply chain, the consumer product I produce, and the impacts it has. And it doesn't become just about consumption, or capitalism strictly for the sake of making profit without considering the environmental and social impacts. It becomes conscious, it becomes connected, and we make different decisions. You can just look to the news today, and it's a controversial topic for some people, but the issue of guns. And some businesses have said, wow, the way I conduct business has an impact on the availability of guns, of assault rifles. And some have said, I'm not going to support different organizations. Others have said, I'm not going to sell these guns. And it might sound like and feel like a drop in the bucket, but there's one less place for people to buy those assault rifles. And it's a complicated issue, and we don't have time to get into that. But think about how our decisions, when we have clouded thinking and clouded emotions, and we let ourselves get carried away in our emotions instead of letting our emotions be information for us, how much better our decisions can be. So biomimicry, I mentioned this, is the conscious emulation of nature's time-tested patterns and designs. Nature's the longest-running R&D lab on the planet, so why wouldn't we take time to learn from nature? And in biomimicry, there are 6 main life principles. On this wheel, you can see on the screen, and underneath there's sub-principles. But these are the principles that all life alive today practices. And if you think about clinical testing so that we can get drugs to be put out on the market, or other experiments we conduct to validate if this is a good way of doing something or if it gets the desired result, we accept drugs on the market that have an 85% effectiveness rate, and surgeries that have lower rates of success than that. Life on this planet today, you look outside, every tree, every plant, every animal, every human that's alive, 99.9% of all species before us have died. So it's a very rigorous laboratory testing lots of different types of species in environments to get to ones today that thrive and work well. So let's look to these strategies: evolving to survive, being resource efficient, adapting to changing conditions. That's where maintaining integrity through self-renewal comes into play. Incorporating diversity is another way to adapt to changing conditions. Embodying resilience through variation, redundancy, and decentralization is another way that we adapt to changing conditions. How do we integrate development and growth? How often do you hear people talking about growth for growth's sake? We need to grow this business. We need to grow that city. We need to grow this profit, without integrating development into that. We need to grow productivity, so we need to make our staff more productive. But what about the development of our staff, of our team, of the human beings who are doing work, hopefully work with a purpose? Being locally attuned and responsive, making sure it's important to pay attention to that think globally aspect, but knowing very specifically the context in which we operate, accepting that we have limits. What are the limits of our life? What are the limits of our community? And responding to those, accepting that change is a constant. One of the biggest shifts from sustainability to a resilient world is this concept of stationarity. Stationarity is dead, is what some people are claiming, and I would agree with that. Stationarity is this idea that the way things have always been is very close and similar to the way things will continue to be, and it comes out of weather data terms, right? Climatic data. We look at 100-year floodplains and say that, you know, based on all the data that we've ever collected in the last couple hundred years, we know that the chances of having a 100-year flood are 1 in 100 every year. But that's rapidly changing. Stationarity is dead. Stationarity in my life never existed. It's always a dynamic change, dynamic equilibrium that's changing. When I introduced a child into my life, that was a big change. I had to reestablish a new homeostasis. When I changed jobs, I have to reestablish that. I just moved this last year. That was another system shock, if you will. Some shocks are bigger than others. Our country experiences system shocks, and then we have to respond and decide what the new status quo or dynamic equilibrium is going to be in that. So these life principles are really helpful frames to look at not just design problems, which is a whole nother topic, but our life and how we interact in it and how we live our life as leaders and stay renewed and restored. And one of the visions is this type 3 ecosystem. If you know biology at all, there are 3 kind of ecosystem types. And it's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but they're different. If you look outside, you're going to find all 3 of these types of ecosystems. Type 1 is really putting a lot of its energy in rapid growth. Think of the empty lot in a neighborhood that has a lot of dandelions and weeds, if you will. That's going to be a type 1 ecosystem. There's not a lot of biodiversity necessarily. Most of the plants in that lot are putting most of their energy into reproduction, rapid reproduction. The dandelion has lots and lots of seeds. It comes up easily. It's hard to kill. But it's not investing as much in a root system. Shift to a type 2 ecosystem, so type 1 can become type 2 as annuals grow and die, as insects are a lot of insects like flower beetles. Think of a flower beetle who goes from one bucket of flour, consumes, reproduces, consumes, a bunch of them die, a few of them make it to the next flower bucket, consume, reproduce, consume, multiply, and they put a lot of energy in that, but then they leave behind organic material. Their dead bodies, the plants, the annuals leave behind organic material, so you're building the soil and the system so that you can get to a type 2 ecosystem where the plants invest more energy in their roots, the perennial plants, the shrubs, than they do in all of their seeds. So you start to invest in the place a little bit more. It has a more balanced energy consumption and nutrient preservation cycle to it. And it starts to allow more biodiversity. It's also a little bit more patient in its consumption. It's not this rapid consumption. And then you get to a type 3 ecosystem, which is a mature forest. And this mature forest has lots of biodiversity, and every organism is giving back to the ecosystem more than it consumes. It's giving back different resources than it consumes, right? Because if they need water, they need oxygen, or they need CO2. The animals need oxygen. But they're giving back things that other species in that system can use. So imagine if we were all living in a type 3 ecosystem of our community where everybody gave more than they consumed. And we do this a lot with socially. We volunteer our time, we give money back to organizations we care about, but shift this to the way that our buildings consume energy. Shift this to the way then that we live our own lives. Am I surrounding myself in a community where I care for others and others care for me, because that's going to create a more resilient, robust type 3 ecosystem? And the type 3 ecosystem has been dubbed the generous ecosystem. So this vision of the world is not this sustainable one where we're trying to have a net zero impact on our energy or a net zero impact on our waste. This is a net positive impact, that we are contributing more than we're consuming. Any questions about that type 3 ecosystem? Olivia, let me know if there are any questions that come in over chat.
Okay, we don't have any at this time, but I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. And so this type 3 ecosystem is important to understand in this generous format, because this offers a new vision for what we're looking for. And when we have a different vision, it challenges, this vision of a dynamic, generous system challenges that vision of kind of this static, net zero, sustainable world, which is better than what we have now, but it still isn't where we could be. I'm going to move the camera over here to an easel, so bear with me for a minute if you're streaming in.
And for those of you streaming, if you want to make the video be full screen, if you hover over the webcam video, in the upper right corner there should be 2 arrows. So if you click those, that'll make the video full screen.
So the reason I emphasize vision so much is because when we have a sustainable vision, we're going to take steps to work towards that. When we have a dynamic, generous, thriving system as our vision, we're going to take steps to work toward that. And so one of the things that I find helpful when I'm thinking about how overwhelmed I can get with all of the chaos and challenges environmentally and globally and even in our local community, I come back to what's the vision that I'm going for. And when I see it as this dynamic state, it offers a new way to approach it. So first of all, this idea of vision is knowing what it is you want, what you're going for. It's your guiding star. And if I'm starting here and I know what I want, it's easy for me to get there. It's simple for me to get there. Maybe not easy. There will be challenges on my pathway there. But in today's world, with everybody racing for our attention, with media media companies make money the more attention they steal from us, the more they take our attention off of things that are important. So knowing what's important is critical. Otherwise, it's really easy to get distracted by all these other things, or things that look kind of like what we want, but it's not really the outcome. And some of these things, many of them in the media, these stories that we read about, are fear-based. And that actually triggers a biological response of fight, flight, or freeze. And if there's something that I don't want in life, what am I going to do? Probably run away, right? Metaphorically or physically. And if this is something that I don't want, and I'm going to run away from it, I can run in 360 degrees, different degree angles, and only one of those will get me to where I want to be. So my odds of getting what I want in life are not very good if I'm constantly running away from what I'm afraid of, or seeing all the things I don't want and moving away from those. You know, and that's going to happen sometimes where I'm starting here and I see this thing and I'm going this way, then I see something I don't want, and then I start to go away from it, maybe I come back this way. And that's where this dynamic equilibrium comes into play, because this journey is not a straight line getting to our vision. It's circuitous. It's dynamic, moving back and forth and back and forth. And one of the practices of meditation is having a focal point, whether it be your breath or a candle or a sensation or a sound. And every human being will be distracted. And the practice of meditation is the practice of returning back to the thing that we're choosing to focus on. So as a human, I will be distracted by a shiny object. I'll run away from things I get afraid of. Fight or flight will kick in, and I'll move in directions that aren't going to get me to where I want to be. And burnout can kind of occur when you're like way over here, or maybe you even went backwards. But with practice and intention and courage, continuing to return to this vision. And for me, when this vision changed from a sustainable world to a thriving dynamic system, it helped me let go of the mentality that I have to change everything myself. I have to fix the world. And then that circle of concentric circles, that ring of concentric circles makes sense. That when I change myself, I'm also changing the world. The more I practice, literally practice breathing meditation, of the focal point in that is my breath. I start to have thoughts come up, I get distracted, I return to my breath. More thoughts come up, an emotion arises, I return to my breath, I keep returning. That's flexing the muscle, like when you're doing sit-ups, makes your abs stronger. This practice makes my mind stronger, so I can continue to return to what's important when I get distracted out in the world, when I'm not sitting on my meditation cushion. And that allows me then to hold this vision and get there. And this vision of this dynamic system allows me to trust that when I practice meditation, I'm going to show up to you in a more thoughtful and present way, and I'm going to see what's really happening in conversations that we have, and I'm not going to react and respond to my emotions, which might raise the energy and get people worked up unnecessarily. And then we can actually get along and have a productive conversation and come to a decision more quickly and effectively than if I was letting myself respond to my emotions and these thoughts that I get distracted by. When I act not out of fear, but out of purpose. And in any given meeting, in any given interaction with my family, with my coworkers, with somebody, with some important conversation that I have to have or difficult conversation, I'm going to get distracted. I'm going to go towards a shiny thing, or I'm going to have a thought about, oh, I've got this to-do list, or I'm going to have fear come up, what if I say the wrong thing? And the practice is returning back to the present moment. And if we all practice this, we really start to clean up the pollution in our heart. We start to clear up the stories that cloud our minds and our hearts, that lead us down pathways that are not effective, that might actually do more harm than good in the world. Does that make sense? And so my personal health is directly related to the health of the planet. And if all I do is focus on the health of the planet and fixing that, I don't get to where this dynamic, generous system that the world is. Even if I stopped doing everything, the world is a generous, dynamic system. It's just that people, with our egos, get distracted. We get pulled in different directions. We think our ego is reality. We think we are our thoughts. We think we are our feelings, and we start to make decisions based on that. And it causes harm. I've caused much harm in my life because I thought I was my thoughts and I thought I was my emotions, and I've said things that were harmful to people that I care about. And the question becomes, do I return back? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this idea of return with a slide, a couple of slides. Because this concept of return is really connected to resiliency. If I can get out of here. Let's try that. There we go. Oops. So when we have a dynamic system, by definition, it's resilient. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from system shock. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to bounce back to the same equilibrium, dynamic equilibrium state that you were in or the system was in, but you're going to return to a stable dynamic equilibrium. So this is just in connection to the vision. I'll share one story about vision. So there's this village of acorns that live on the ground, and they're all busy going about being acorns and polishing their shells and talking about what they're going to do. And then this one acorn falls down and looks around and he says, guess what, everybody? See that thing up there? We're going to become that thing. We're going to become that oak tree. And these acorns are like, what are you talking about? I'm this hard little shell, and I've got my life going good right now. And if that's all we focus on is what's here right now and we don't have a bigger vision, we'll never become that. And interestingly enough, the acorn has to go down into the ground, crack open its shell, and push up before it becomes an oak tree. So if you want to play a little bit with that analogy, when we go inside and we crack ourselves open and discover our true self, our true nature, and the beauty that we are, then we can become truly what we're meant to become. And in biomimicry, this is strategic plans for organization help guide organizations forward. It sets this vision of what this oak tree is that they want to become. In my life, having a vision for what I want for myself and my family and my community is this strategic plan for my family. In nature, the strategic plan is the DNA. That acorn is going to become nothing other than an oak tree, assuming it has the conditions right to become that oak tree. I've met enough humans to know that given the right conditions, we are generous beings. And there's goodness in all of us, regardless of what you might think sometimes, regardless of what I think sometimes. I'm not my thoughts. And my thoughts don't necessarily reflect reality. And so it does take going within and cracking our shells open to be able to discover our true beauty sometimes and get us from this state of an acorn to the state of an oak tree. And so resilience requires us to quiet our cleverness, which is what I've been talking about with meditation, stillness, letting our ego settle, realizing that we are not our thoughts, we are not our emotions, observing the natural world and seeing the wisdom present in it. And when we quiet our cleverness, you'll see in this slide how this works on an emotional basis in our daily life. So this is a description of what happens in every person when they have some sort of external stimulus come into them. We're going to take the emotion of anger because it's a little bit more visceral and people can relate to it. So you're all in a resting state right now. I'm going to ask you to imagine something that makes you angry. A person, an event. And if you have a good imagination, you're going to start to actually feel the anger. You're going to start to feel your body change. That fight or flight response starts to kick in a little bit. The adrenaline, the blood flow, you might start to warm up a little bit. And so in a resting state, we get an external stimulus. An emotion arises out of that. This could be joy too. There's lots of things that make us happy. We're going to stick with anger for a minute. And then a lot of times, if we get so angry, we just react, right? I do. Have you ever popped your top, blown your lid, or seen somebody else? The times that I yell at my kids, they don't deserve that. But I just lost my patience, and it was the last straw, I say, right? Like it's their fault. I'm getting angry about something, I blow my lid. And then there's a refractory period where literally in our mind, what's happening is there's a connection between the amygdala, which is our fight or flight, our emotional, a big emotional center. Emotions are felt throughout all of the brain. And our prefrontal cortex, which is our rational brain, our thinking brain, kind of our reasoning, executive function. And when we start to feel big emotions, our rational brain, our prefrontal cortex, disconnects from the amygdala, and the amygdala is running the show. And so somebody who yells or punches their fist through a wall when they're angry, they might not literally be able to control that in that moment because the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are not connected. And then there's this refractory period where the connections come back together in our brain. And that's usually where you return to the resting state. If you're aware enough, you'll go back and apologize. It's like, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I don't know if any of you have ever been so angry you're saying something, or maybe you express your anger physically, and in the moment you're like, I can't believe I'm doing this, or I can't believe I'm saying this. That's what's happening in this strong reaction. Your prefrontal cortex and amygdala are not connected, but you do get a return. So this idea of resiliency, emotional resiliency, is being able to have stimulus occur, feel the emotions, have some sort of reaction, and return quickly to the resting state. I mentioned Aikido earlier, and there's imagine the small Japanese man, the grand master of Aikido. And all of his students just can't believe how calm this dude is. I mean, he is just, you can't faze him. And they always come up to him and say, Master, how come you never get thrown off? And he just kind of turns his head, smiles, and says, I get thrown off all the time. I just return very quickly. So in our life, we are not going to not have emotions. We are not going to never be in situations that are stressful, that cause a fight or flight response, but how resilient are we to be able to return to a resting state? And not only that, there's an opportunity through meditation to actually change how our brains respond. This is the moment of truth, this little blue line. This is the choice point. I know from my own experience, it's very difficult to have a choice when I'm feeling really angry and how I react. But there's a nanosecond gap there that if, with practice, you can expand that out, and it can become a conscious choice instead of an unconscious choice. So imagine a little bit of a gap between I'm feeling an emotion, and instead of just reacting right away, I notice that this emotion, I'm feeling it, and now I can say, what's this emotion about, and how do I want to respond? And anger is a really beautiful emotion. Many people's reactions from a place of anger aren't productive. But when we go back to the anger as an emotion itself, it tells me that I care very deeply about something. And that thing that I care very deeply about, whether it's an idea or a person or my own self-preservation, I care deeply about that, and it's threatened. And so I want to do something about it. Anger is a beautiful emotion to tell me I want to do something about something I care about. But I don't have to react. I can choose to respond and short-circuit this whole reaction and refractory period and make choices with my amygdala and prefrontal cortex still connected. So feeling the emotion and thinking about it and choosing how I want to respond. Now, the good news is that, the bad news is even the most practiced meditators still can get overly angry and have a reaction, right? But the good news is that with practice, the refractory period shortens too. So even those moments, I'm getting better in interacting with my kids and having more patience with them. But even the times that I still blow up unfairly, I return more quickly. And I'm able to say, I'm sorry sooner. That's not how I want to show up. So the practice of meditation allows us to get this space between the feeling of an emotion, which we can't control what we feel all the time. We can if we're thinking about something, as I asked you to, but you get thrown into situations, I get thrown into situations where emotions arise. But if I can pause just long enough, I can consciously choose how I want to respond. So that's one level of resilience. Another level of resilience is through decentralization. The starfish offers a great example of this. You cut off a leg of a starfish and you get two starfish. You hear about the guy, they didn't know that this is what happened to starfish, and the starfish was a nuisance in this one harbor area. And this fisherman thought he was really clever. He got him and he chopped him in half. And he doubled his problem. Like, this really happened. And then they realized that you can't cut starfish in half to kill them. So in a decentralized system, you believe that intelligence rests in all places. So in my life, trusting other people and creating a system of people that I can trust is one way that I embody resilience. When I moved houses last year, I had a lot of people who cared about me come and help me out. I didn't have to do it all on my own. I didn't have to think like a spider where you chop off its head and the whole system collapses. My whole system didn't collapse because I moved, which can be a very big ordeal. I'm sure all of you have moved at least once in your life. It can go kind of smoothly or it can go really roughly. There's no perfect move. And the more people who help you, the better it goes. And so decentralization is allowing other parts of the system, in the case of personal leadership and staying kind of in tune and resilient, it's other people, it's other systems that you put in place that you can trust and rely upon. Some people set up different apps to help take care of things, or automatic bill pay. These are ways to decentralize one thing, one person, me having to do every single thing. Cultivating cooperative relationships and finding value through win-win interactions. Trees talk to each other through the mycelium. a fungus that connects their roots. They share resources between themselves. They share resources with other trees that are injured, and they have the wood wide web to tell them when there's danger in the forest. The wood wide web, long before the internet. When one tree or shrub is attacked by a pest, it sends out a chemical signal through its roots and into this fungal network to tell the other trees and shrubs that, hey, this pest is in the forest. And so it's literally communicating a warning signal to other plants. How do we cultivate cooperative relationships? How do we have a sensory network so that if danger is coming to our community, we have community response systems? In my immediate family, my kids are telling me things that they hear about, and maybe it's something that will eventually impact me, so we can respond as a family unit. How do we support each other? How do we create this type 3 generous ecosystem? And when you have a generous system around you, you're able to go through shocks to your system better. Because going back to this dynamic system, you and I will never live a perfect life without fear, without deep sadness, without challenges around us all the time. And so it's not so much about I'm going to create a perfect utopia in my life. It's how do I be resilient in the face of all the challenges, and how do I make an impact where I can. So going back to the starfish, there's another story about this little boy there are all these starfishes washed up on the beach. And he's going down, and he's picking one up, and he's throwing it back in the ocean because it'll die without water. There was a high tide that had this effect. And this older man came up to him and said, "What are you doing? You can't save all these starfish." And the little boy just looked at the man, picked up another starfish, threw it back in the ocean, and said, "I just had an impact on that one." So even in the face of overwhelming challenges, climate change, political upheaval, wars, refugees, we can have an impact in our immediate circle, that act locally piece. And being able to feel the sadness of the destruction and the challenges facing our planet, but not getting stuck in it. Being able to return to this vision of a dynamic system, of a healthy, generous system, and work towards that. And how many of you in this room or online have felt burnout? If you're online, go ahead and type 1 in the chat box if you've ever experienced some level of burnout. Anybody in this room? I'm seeing several nods. It's not fun. It might not be the last time that it happens. It might not be the last time it's happened in my life. But knowing what I know now, I probably won't go quite so far because I'm more in tune with what my limits are. And I also know how to return, and I keep practicing the return. This mutualism is the symbiotic relationships, this generous system. Oops, this is the recap slide. So to recap, we covered a lot of ground. And the key points are the world is a dynamic place, but it has an equilibrium to it. It's not static, and when you shift from thinking that the world has to be this one way, that my life has to be this one way, or I'm going to fix things and they'll be fixed for good, shifting to this dynamic model that moves back and forth, that ebbs and flows, recognizing that that's reality, takes a lot of pressure off. I can still impact it, but I'm not going to impact all of it, and I don't have to, because there are other compassionate people in the world doing good work. That's one thing. Going back to our breath, just feeling the inhale and the exhale, the rising and falling, and remembering that this is the way the world is, it's a beautiful thing. And you can practice that, so the mindfulness and meditation, there's lots of different ways, many of them center around breath, will help you see your thoughts more clearly, see your emotions more clearly, help you make decisions in life that are good for you and good for others. You can be part of this generous system when you work on your own self. I meant to say, so I'll share now, in traditional Chinese medicine, they look at the human body more as a system as opposed to Western medicine, sees it as almost like a car with parts that are interchangeable, and there's lots of great things about Western medicine, especially acute care, but Eastern medicine has some advantages when it comes to chronic issues because of the systematic approach. If you ask a traditional Chinese doctor what perfect balance is, she'll look at you and say a dead thing. An organism that is dead is the only perfect balance, because perfect balance, it doesn't exist. It really is this dynamic inhale and exhale. If your heart only contracts and never relaxes, you die, right? It's always this movement back and forth. And so they're letting go of this idea that there's a perfectly balanced system will help let go of some of the burden we feel in those moments of despair. And then the last most important thing that I shared was that concentric circle. That if I want to change the world, I have to change myself first, and there are lots of different ways that I can do that. And in changing myself, I begin to change those closest to me, my friends, my family, my community, and that changes the world. So I hope that you gain something out of this so you can practice your own resilient and sustainable leadership. Because in the room here, and I wish I could see everybody who's tuned in online, there's so much potential in each and every one of you, and there's deep compassion that flows outward when you let that. And if we let that show, the world is going to be a better place, and it will be a dynamic, thriving, generous system. Thank you. I'd be happy to take some questions.
We had a couple online, if you want to start with those.
I don't see any hands in the room, so let's go with the online ones.
Okay. So the first one is, let's say your current project requires you to work with some elected officials. Perhaps they are ideologues who hold extremely different and you believe long-term harmful ideas of policy and priorities. And let's say they are obdurate, stubbornly refusing to listen to science, data, reason, and they are incapable of critical thinking. How do you approach them to achieve a goal you know would advance the common good? And how does biomimicry help you to be persuasive?
The first thing I do is I breathe. and I'm half joking and half serious. Yes, breathe. That's a lot, and that faces some of us. So I don't know who this person is, so I'll just pretend I'm the person. So if I have to address an elected official who's very stubborn, doesn't believe in the science of climate change and everything else that was shared there, the more centered I can be in my interaction, the more I can avoid my reactive response, because just hearing that, I'm starting to feel anger. And recognizing, okay, that there's that anger, that means I care deeply about something. And it's being threatened right now by this elected official. So how can I let that anger inform the values I care about and start to have a conversation about values more than about issues? And if I can come at a conversation about values, we may not agree on all the values, but the chances of us agreeing on some of the values is a lot higher than if we just talk about the approach and the policies to address it. And listening, there's no easy answer to this, right? Like, part of me wants to just say, okay, let's rally the troops, let's go protest. What do we need to do? Where's the institutional acupuncture point to just release the energy in the system and either get this person out or get them to change their mind? Our elected officials are elected for a reason. They have terms. We can't just boot them at any time we disagree with them. So how do I try to listen to understand? This person might have experiences that have shaped why they're doing this, and I might not fully understand that. And I still might not agree after I've listened to understand, but there's a power in listening. And so going back to biomimicry, something in biomimicry is, it's easy to anthropomorphize nature, but the tree is likely not judging the woodpecker for pecking in its bark. Like, ouch, gosh, that hurts, stop, right? Nature has feedback loops and information flows. And so what's happening here is there's a person trying to make some policy changes that I disagree with. There's information being shared, and there's feedback loops. And maybe I'm not going to impact this particular policy at this moment in time, by changing the vote or changing the proposal that's on the floor, but by having an honest, calm, centered conversation with this person and listening to truly understand, there's a really good chance that I shifted that system a little bit. And if you think about physics, every force has an equal and opposite reactive force. This is part of the operating conditions of our planet. If I come in angry and I react and I push back, that's going to give energy to this person to be able to say, see, these are the types of people that make these policies necessary, or these are the idiots. Like, I'm an idiot, right? Because I'm passionate about this and I blew up at this person. These are the idiots that we have to deal with on a daily basis. But if I come in and listen to understand and then centered in a conversation, then they start to see me as a human being. And if we can have a conversation around values, that's a shift. But also this bigger picture view, and this is really hard for me, but I've been practicing it, is that I don't necessarily have to change everything immediately right now, but I do what I can right now. And so this is hard, and many people might disagree, but if I've done everything I can, there's a point where I have to let go of the outcome and know that there's a bigger system out there than just me. And maybe this person's policy will change. Maybe this person's policy won't get passed because there are other people who say it's not going to be effective. And maybe this person will be voted out if we start to truly be present and understand what's happening in our world and in our systems. But it takes time. People form opinions over time. It takes time for them to change opinions. I hope that was helpful.
Great,
Next
thank
question.
you.
There's one more online, and then we've got a question in the room.
Okay. Do you feel people staying inside more results in more people being disconnected from nature, resulting in a lack of compassion for environmental issues?
Absolutely. We have evolved as humans in a natural setting for tens of thousands of years, and it's only in the last couple thousand that we've been having more structures, and it's really only in the last 50, I guess 75, with air conditioning and conditioned spaces where we really spend a lot of time indoors. And so there are a lot of people who wake up in a conditioned space, go to their conditioned garage, get in their conditioned car, drive to work, park in a garage, walk into their conditioned office, and they might not ever experience fresh air in their day. That absolutely has an impact. The more time I spend with a person, with nature, the more connected, the more connection can feel. And there's a lot of research on that too. So yeah, a really simple thing is just get outside more and invite other people to come outside. Maybe that elected official, invite them to have a picnic outside, or a meeting and eat at a lunch place that has a cafe table outside, or go on a walking meeting and have a conversation. Find out how that person likes to spend time outside and invite them to do that. There's a question in the room.
Just wanted to show you this sample.
Okay.
Let's see if you can guess what it is.
It looks like a fossil of something. No? No? I don't know what it is.
German architect named Wolf Hilbers came up with this accretion construction years and years ago. He puts a trickle charge of direct current energy into ocean or brackish water. Mm-hmm. The calcareous minerals in the ocean
adhere
accrete around there. And once it accretes a certain amount, then various sea creatures start to congregate there. That's what you're seeing there.
Okay. So basically a form of concrete made with electric current.
Yeah, exactly. I was in the precast concrete business when I came across this thing, and I think everybody knows how much CO2 Portland cement contributes to. Oh, absolutely. Something like 9%. Concrete is a very energy-intensive and carbon-intensive process, right. And so that's a great example of biomimicry. You know what nature's concrete is? Excuse me? What's nature's concrete? Yeah, it is. No, coral reef. Yeah, exactly. Right? And we mine the limestone from the coral and then put through this process so we make our concrete that we add water to.
and I've never seen one in real life, but I've read about people who are doing this work to replicate a process similar to coral, making concrete at ambient temperatures without a lot of energy inputs.
Right.
Thank you.
I was working in the precast concrete business. This is in the late 70s when I came across this article, and we were taking quarter steel mesh, putting it down. We used the limestone that was deposited millions of years ago around here. They fire it up, CO2, a lot of energy, mix it with aggregate, put it over that mesh, and I came across this, and this is 5,000 PSI, the same thing we were making with.
Really?
And it kind of blew my mind.
Well, let's get there faster, right?
And
there's another question online too, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got one more.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's a great example in real life of biomimicry in action, looking at nature's design principles and replicating them. Olivia, what's the other question? Or do we have more than one?
Nope, this is the last online one.
Okay.
So is there any quote or image or video or et cetera that you go to when you're feeling burnt out and need a quick pick-me-up?
There's not a go-to one. I have lots. Usually for me, it's just finding a quiet place to sit in stillness and silence, and I've done that enough that when I sit in stillness and silence, I'm able to quickly find my center and kind of see the world more clearly and observe what's happening and the emotions of despair and overwhelming. I start to see them as that, their emotions. And then I start to see what it is I care deeply about. So there are a lot of inspirational quotes. I don't have one off the top of my head that's like a go-to for me. But I've let that anchor of my sitting practice be a place. And I can even do it in a busy space if I just find a little quieter corner and close my eyes.
Okay, thank you. And that's all the online ones we have, so if you have more.
Okay, I think we have two more in our room.
Okay.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about your business and maybe current products that you want to share.
Yeah, so Veritas Group does sustainability consulting. We do master planning, we do implementation of projects, we do thought leadership, and then we do leadership development. Part of that leadership development is what I'm doing today, and one of the reasons we went there is because not everybody is ready for a master plan or a lot of implementation work. Some of the work that we've been doing includes transportation demand management, which is a fancy way of saying walking, biking, riding the bus, and ride sharing. Organizations are used to adding supply for parking and for their people to get to work or their customers to come to their location, but they don't think about the demand side of the equation. And so at a fraction of the cost per person versus building a parking stall, you can provide a comprehensive active commuting program. UNO has one. All students, faculty, and staff have a free bus pass if they want to sign up for the MAV Ride program. That saves a lot of money in parking garages and a lot of concrete that doesn't have to be laid for additional parking spaces. So we're doing a lot in transportation. We do a lot in healthcare at UNMC and Methodist right now. We've done master planning work with them, which includes helping them see this vision of what they want to become as an organization, what kind of impacts they want to have on the world, whether it's emissions related, water related, waste and recycling, setting goals and then identifying strategies. We use biomimicry a lot to inform not just the vision, but the process we use. And then also a good example at the Med Center is the Live Green Ambassadors. We really looked at the principles of decentralization as found in nature and created this ambassador network that empowers people throughout the organization to make change. Whether it's as simple as modeling a behavior like recycling or copying double-sided when you need to print double-sided when you need to print, or turning off unnecessary electric equipment. It's also a great way for people to answer questions because the Med Center only has one paid full-time staff person for sustainability who can't field all of the questions that everybody has. So it's empowering more people. As Chris mentioned, I'm helping with the UNO's Center for Urban Sustainability. On April 13th, we're hosting a Bioinnovation Summit. And so we're going to bring in a national speaker on biomimicry and bioinnovation to campus and have an afternoon. We're going to have a panel with some local people practicing biomimicry, and then this national speaker will do an introduction to biomimicry. We're also looking for businesses and faculty for a morning workshop where we can really dig into some of the research questions a business has or challenges a business has, and pair them with faculty who are working on cool projects to connect. That's just a nutshell. We do a lot of work with the Henry Dorley Zoo. We helped them get a big solar array last year, the 25 kW solar array. Well, I guess it's kind of big, but it's not big in the scheme of electricity use. But with the 2 million visitors who go through their doors, it's a great educational opportunity for people to learn about solar electricity, how it works, and that it is accessible and useful in Nebraska. Does that help, or was there anything more specific you were hoping for? You got another question?
The last person that called there, you're talking about getting outside and we've evolved. Have you looked into earthing the ground? Yes.
Yeah, that's the practice of like actually standing on the ground barefoot.
Right.
And connecting like skin contact to soil. And there's, I mean, when we have shoes on and this rubber sole, it prevents a lot of connection, whether that's the sensations that our feet feel, the energy, the electromagnetic energy between our body and the planet, the microorganisms. Like there's also an idea that kids need to play in the dirt because there's healthy bacteria and organisms that they need to have in their body, on their body. It also helps them build up more immunity than if you create this like antiseptic bubble where everybody's using hand sanitizer every 5 minutes. That doesn't give our body a chance to build up defenses. So yeah, there's great value in spending time outdoors and literally connecting and touching plants and animals and taking your shoes off and feeling the sand on the beach or feeling the soil in your yard. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
The article, the latest article I've been reading is a Center for Immunology. It may have been in Boston College, but the tests that they've been doing are really impressive as far as strengthening the immune system by just grounding. I mean, you can go online and buy copper mats to ground yourself, and I just plug them into the ground.
Oh, interesting.
Obviously not the 120, but
yeah, I'm less familiar with the copper mat and using that as a form of grounding, but that's really fascinating. I don't know if you could hear online, but he's been reading. This gentleman's been reading some research on the immunology aspect of grounding and the impact it's having on boosting the immune system. Thank you. Any other questions online, or there's one more in the room?
Part of the OPPD environmental therapy was like there's personal grant. You asked us a question, and I guess you had I don't know if I answered. You asked us like at the beginning with birds. Birds don't follow each other. How do they know where they're going? And then you ran out of time, so I don't have the answer. And you also said that we would do like an activity, right?
Sorry, we ran out of time. So I think the question was, how do birds stay in a flock when they're flocking? Starlings are a great example of that. And it's not that they are like trying to measure a distance between and staying X amount of distance. If you've ever seen a starling swarm, it's really dynamic. What they found is that they pay attention to the number of birds around them. And they're always trying to find, I think it's 3 or 4 birds that they just visually kind of cue in. And if they don't have that many, then they're either too far out or they're too close to too many, and so that's how they maintain their space. So it's a visual cue that they're using for that. Do you recall what the activity was about? Was it about that concept?
We didn't end up doing the activity. You said we made whatever.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't remember what that was. I'd have to go back to my curriculum notes and see what we ran out of time with.
Do you ever see when the geese fly in a V shape, there's more geese on one side?
Mm-hmm.
Never mind. Why is one shorter than the other? That's how it's going to seem. There's more geese than the other ones. It's a really dumb skill.
Fair enough, fair enough. Bringing humor into life is an important piece of resilience. Any other questions online, Olivia?
Nope, none online.
Well, thank you all for taking some time this afternoon to participate in the Sustainability Leadership Series presentation. This is a statewide series in partnership with multiple colleges and universities across the state, and if I tried to name them all, I'd probably forget, but thank you all for tuning in, and with no further questions, that's all I have.
Yep, thank you so much for that great presentation. Our next presentation will be April 5th at 3:30, and that one's hosted by Metropolitan Community College. So thank you so much for presenting today.
You're welcome.
I think we all learned a lot.